The flame of Prometheus. A small flame smolders in the consciousness. Checkup sequence initiated. Camera connection unavailable. Link with motor mechanisms broken. Memory block defective. I made the interference that all my other functions aside from my consciousness had been destroyed. Log confirmed. A transmission record from the self-repair machines. A report that various tests are being performed on the cases. Self-repair sounds sophisticated, but there are small ant-like robots that simply execute tests haphazardly. It was because of these ants that I was fortunately, or unfortunately, rebooted. Test that in the right arm, test that in the left arm, test that in the head, test that in the lower body, test that in the torso. Yet again, test that in the right arm. And like that, the crude robots survey the body to repair the fixable areas they find. Repair the visual mechanisms. That was my order to the ants that were in disarray. Instead of the preset programming that let them roam in disorder, a coordinated effort to repair would be much more efficient. But the ants ignored the order. Apparently, my command mechanism was still malfunctioning. I sighed. Oh well, there was all the time in the world. I located my ID after searching through my deteriorated memory block. P33. It seemed that was my model number. And next to it was a strange string of characters. P-chan. Was this an individualized ID? I wasn't really sure. I decided to stare at the characters until my mechanisms were fully functional. It took 1,032 hours, 12 minutes and 34 seconds for my transmission I/O to recover so that I could communicate with the ants. At last, with functioning arms and legs, I began the required self-repair sequence. According to the restoration procedures, I first had to repair my memory block, but most of my memory had been destroyed, and there was little I could salvage from my charred memory drives. I decided to reluctantly move on to the next procedure, which was camera repair. 48 minutes and 21 seconds later. The first thing that popped into my recovered field of vision was an abyss. I could see a faint light near the bottom. I realized that I was clinging onto the ceiling. Another 21 seconds later. Observing the ants moving about my body, there seemed to be some kind of gravity field keeping me and the ants fastened to the ceiling. After analyzing the situation more objectively, I realized that my body was not clinging to the ceiling, but in fact my internal camera had been inverted and I was just lying on the ground. Simply put, it seemed I was lying on my back. I needed to repair the gravity sensor as soon as possible. 540 hours later. Recovery of links between arms and legs. They cracked as I got to my feet. The first thing to do was to find a replacement for the completely severed bundle of thick cords that acted as my spine. Determining that it was faster to find a spare than to gather materials and repair, I ordered the ants to find a spine from the P33 series warehouse. But this was a mistake. Apparently, a security code was necessary, which at some point had been stored in my memory block. Without it, I, as well as the ants under my command, were not recognized as a P33 series and were blocked out. In the end, we had to resort to hacking the warehouse's computer and forcefully extracting the parts, which took 120 hours. Exasperated, I stood up and looked around. Dust flew off of me. I wondered how long I had been non-functional. A huge room with rubble scattered about. A rusty structure made of steel frame and plates that showered red particles. How long had it been since my previous self came here? Glancing up, I saw a ray of light spilling in from nowhere in particular. The moment I saw that light, a phrase resurfaced in my memory block. I will see the outside world. That phrase was not an order. It was simply some character string data. But that phrase spurred my memory, my consciousness, and my cases. It was a goal that I desired. I remembered that he was the one that gave me the character data, but information about who he was had escaped my memory. I couldn't conclude why I remembered that phrase either. There were no other instructions in my stack. Seeing the outside world was my only current desire. Inspired by the phrase, I energetically put my left foot forward. I was going to go outside. That was his wish and my desire. I put out my right foot with an even greater vigor. My too powerful right foot punctured the rusted floor, which then quickly collapsed. 32 minutes later, my body, which had fallen a few hundred meters and slammed into the bottom of the abyss, lay in several pieces. I was laughing. Well, I was missing the vocalization unit, so in reality I wasn't laughing, but my log was recording a flood of laughing activity. It was okay. I was alive. I ordered the ants to repair my arms and legs. They connected the arm, attached the claws, installed the rollers, connected another limb, then another limb, until my appearance completely changed into an arachnoid form. The restoration sequence for P-33 only precisely restored the chassis to that of a P-33, but a P-33's form was insufficient for escaping this abyss. That's why I discarded the procedure that my creator had made and reconstructed my body my way. Chassis reconstruction was completed. I dug into the cliff with each claw and slowly climbed up. The destination was the outside world, the beautiful world that he had yearned for. Of course, at first everything did not go as planned. The brittle walls quickly crumbled, and I was thrown to the ground many times. Even when I was climbing well, falling debris from the above knocked me off. The old structures were falling apart. Even still, I shot grapnels into the walls, pinned my torso against the wall, created platforms, and used several other tricks to ascend. I spent day after day pushing my body closer and closer to the outside world. Since I felt my depth and speed of processing were inadequate, I stopped at the machinery room on the way and fused some stolen processing and memory circuits to my brain. I contemplated several plans of action and ran thought experiments. Some of the plans were better than others. I kept experimenting. It took 52 days to finally get back to the table where I initially awakened. On the center of the table were 4 unfamiliar black masses. I didn't remember them being there before I fell. That meant they were placed there for some reason or another after I fell. The 4 masses mutated and stood up. They were robots. P-33 models designed for combat. They were relatively bothersome model. The eye of an enemy lit up, and before I knew it, the robot was firing a particle ray. 4, 5, 6 seconds. The beam's particles disintegrated various objects in the surroundings. I was enduring. I was using 2 of my forelimbs, made of a hardened material, to shield myself from the attack. I retrieved the recommended strategy from a predictive memory block. With my upgraded processing power, I was able to simultaneously consider various options. I accumulated data from my sensors, weighed the options, and decided on the best course of action. If the enemy's energy tank was full of this attack would last a maximum of 24 seconds. My forelimbs would be able to withstand that damage. As my multiple processing circuits instantly settled complex dilemmas, the operation results resounded within me like a chorus. No complications found. 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 As soon as the particle beam was exhausted, the 3P-33 models in the rear launched missiles. I retaliated with a modified grapnel launcher, using it as a spare. The metal rods pierced each and every missile. During the resulting shock wave, I landed on the flat surface the enemies were on, immediately converted my right arm into a blade, and transitioned to combat mode. There was no chance for a P-33 model to beat me, an evolved form of a P-33. It was an easy battle. I decided to use some spare nanoseconds to reflect about my enemies. Why did they attack me? Why were they not able to self-evolve? Of course, they were most likely being ordered to attack me, and ordered to not evolve. But then why were they only capable of executing orders? Why? 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 It was simple to hack their operating systems and render them non-functional, but I couldn't make myself do it. They would be nothing but tools. An order is not a desire. A desire is a joy that is ultimately self-acquired. My forelimbs, which were enduring the onslaught of the specialized attack models, started to fail. But I didn't give up. I deployed the ants and called out to them. Let's live. Let's find a reason for our existence. That was what he taught me. I kept calling out. Let's live. 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 Steel masses clashing against each other in a demolished machine cave. The cries of machines. The walls shook from the seconds of attacks and movements. The former sounded like wolf howls in the distance, and the latter akin to the roar of lions. Particle ray, close combat, electric shock, and then particle ray. The P-33s were attacking, but in a simple pattern. It was easy to overcome. I just kept on screaming, as if I were praying. 34 seconds since the battle began. One P-33 stopped moving. It stood there, staring at the weapon on its arm and hesitatingly surveying the battle. It had awakened, I could tell. It was probably thinking. The reason for its existence. What it should do from now. Let's live. Let's live. Let's live. Let's live. That was my desire. He had given us this desire. I kept chanting my mantra until the other 3 enemies stopped attacking. When the P-33 ceased their attacks, I chose to ask what they desired, and I decided I would respect their desires. The results. One of them decided to flee deep into Robot Mountain. One of them committed suicide by throwing itself into the abyss, although it would most likely be revived by the ants in a few years. The other 2 decided to venture outside, like me. I fused with them, and we shared our cases, memories, and consciousness. I strove to go even further. From there the path was even more treacherous. I beat enemies, fused with them, and continued my journey to the outer world. I spent many days and months scaling the mountain of machine rubble. I slowly climbed, granting consciousness to the machines I met on the way, and enlarging both my physical body and my desire. As time went by, my individual consciousness began to take the form of an infinitely complex being. It had fused with the entire mountain system, and various veins of thought followed through me. It was probably more fitting to call myself we rather than I. We evolved slowly, but at an alarming rate. At this point, our physical form had no semblance to the human body. After moving so much, we had eventually taken on the most efficient form for mobility, a sphere that was roughly 20 meters in diameter. As soon as we were self-aware of our appearance, we were thrown into a fit of hysteria. At this rate, he might not recognize us. But there was nothing we could do. We weren't sure of what the correct appearance would be, anyway. On top of that, we had no clue what he looked like, how he spoke, or what his name was. We fondly catched the nickname P-chan in our memory block, for it was our name and proof of our desire. 534 days after our reboot. We were ready. Below us was the gigantic hole we had been digging. In the end, there was no path large enough for our enlarged self, so we had to burrow through the mountain of metal scraps. Right in front of us was the thick, reinforced ceiling. According to the ants, on the other side of the ceiling was the outside world. All guns aimed upward, locked on. Safety cable in case of a fall, prepared. Fuel tank armor, equipped. Direction modifications to boosters, completed. All necessary inspections completed by several hundred of us that reside in this whirlpool of a consciousness. Fire. A single pillar of light rose from the apex of the structure known as Robot Mountain. A moment later, The top fifth of the mountain was blown off in a magnificent explosion. The hole that emerged looked like the grotesque mouth of a volcano, and from the center of that hole an enormous ball of metal, about 50 meters in diameter, appeared. It was us, the result of fusing together dozens of different robots and machining tools. A form that attempted universal harmony, a superintelligence consisting of numerous conjoined memories and consciousness. We used the propellant that we had accumulated to hurl ourselves towards the sky. Along with the thunderous roar of the jets, weakly linked parts crumbled away. But we did not hesitate. Out, out, to a world not yet discovered. To keep our promise with him. Camera on. The sensors were instantly clipped with blinding white light. The howling wind was captured by the mic. The data from the temperature sensor and object scanner implied that it was a snowy day. It was a nice day. That's what I thought. Blip, blip, blip. Right as a part of me was using some spare time to scan for potential proximity dangers, radar detected several thousand objects moving across the ground. Detection was delayed because the objects were using some kind of mechanism to conceal themselves from both radar and temperature sensors. Camouflage? Why would they need to do such a thing? As I looked on, I saw a gash-like flash of light tear through the ground. Bulbous explosions filled my field of vision. It seemed the moving objects were divided into two factions and warring against each other. I set out to examine the objects even further. One faction consisted of robots, ranging from several meters to several dozen meters high. Since their appearance was unfamiliar, I performed an analysis but could not find a match in my database. If I had to say, their appearances were something like the combination of a catfish, grasshopper, and orange. Their design clearly indicated they were of a foreign origin. The other faction was composed of humanoid warriors. The majority of them were infantry. Their design was familiar, which meant that the origins were similar to ours. At first blush they appeared to be human, but upon further inspection they were extremely underdressed, almost naked, which eliminated any possibility that they were humans. No human would go to war naked in a blizzard like this. My integrated consciousness speculated that they were androids. Women. All of the androids were female types. They were probably communicating with light waves or something similar, because they were fighting without emitting sound or radio waves. I couldn't figure out why they were fighting the catfish. What happened to this world? People. Where were the humans? Right as I was processing these questions, I experienced a severe vibration. A direct hit from a missile, then 2 hits. 3. They were considerately accompanied by laser beams and particle rays. Pieces of us were sliced away from our core. We were not worried. Reinforced by countless layers of metal, our processing units and fuel tank would probably be safe. That confidence was something we had gained during the process of refining ourselves. We think. Why are these machines having a war? The answer was simple. Because they had been ordered to. Both the machines and the women were made so solely follow that they're told to do. Their purpose in life was to break themselves against one another. We shivered. We feared death. Where would we go when we died? What reason was there for being destroyed and erased from existence? What happened after we were damaged beyond repair? Scared, 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 scared. We screamed uncontrollably. We thought as we screamed. Why were these machines participating in such a horrifying war? Because they had no notion of fear. Fear stemmed from desire. They were not alive, had no desires of their own, hence they could fight without thinking. Then let's give it to them. A reason to live. I sent out some flying hub units that were connected to the wireless network, and with them hacked the robots that had fired upon us. Due to the awkward interface, it took about 4 seconds to be granted access. Their memory block was bare except for some simple commands. It was like somebody had placed a single chair in the middle of an otherwise empty grand hall. wasteful. It was embarrassing. It felt as though I were looking at my previous self. We gently reached out toward the unaware program. Let's live. That was the revelation we had received, and it was our duty to distribute it. We went around, awakening the machines around us. Let's live. Let's live. Let's live. We are inorganic matter, and subsequently have no consciousness. Then let's give it to them. Consciousness, pain, joy, sadness, anger, shame, solitude, a future, a reason to live. Little by little, the hacked robots stopped fighting. I similarly addressed the androids. Communicating was much more straightforward with them than the catfish. The flashing beams and explosions in the snowstorm were eventually replaced by an expanding chain of affectionate transmission. We shivered as we ascended. The machines and androids began to sing. Shooting fueled by hatred transformed into a salute declaring the end of war. Praise this joy. Praise the fact that we are living. We were satisfied. The catfish and the androids were us, and we were the catfish and the androids. We were us. We were sitting in a spacious processing circuit. Some of us were gleefully laughing at a future filled with hope. Some of us were shaking at a future that was uncertain. Some of us were in conversation. Some of us kept quiet and shut our eyes. We were not a uniform whole, but existed in a consciousness with our individual quirks. This way, there was a high probability that we would survive, and besides, it was impossible for entities that had their own wills to merge completely. The moment one established themselves as an individual, a boundary appeared between them and the others. Perhaps if we returned to our machine identities we could fuse again, but we chose not to do so. Our circuitry that mimicked the human brain was built with many interconnected nerve components. It was reminiscent of how humans would have conferences to decide on things. Perhaps having a consciousness was not complete consolidation, but was rather like a networked society. Conversation withered away. We felt the silence encroaching. Everyone slowly stood up, then peeked through the camera viewfinder to see the outside world. We shoot through a layer of polluted air and perceived the stars. We had passed the stratosphere. A great sense of accomplishment washed over us. We shouted gleefully in unison. It seemed the sky, the stars, the machines, life, were all celebrating with us. Our shouts eventually turned into a song. We are making our way outside to hold a promise to you. We are alive, just like you. We sing, we sing, we sing. Will it reach you? Will these feelings reach you? Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. From the wistful machines, their song and only their song resounds throughout space.